I am going to go through and I am going to describe the functionality of the utility mode. So, first of all, I'm going to show you, we've been stepping through our mode buttons by just pushing the mode button here, down to utility mode. We can also hold down shift and push the mode button to step backwards. That way you can always get to wherever you want to go in a few button clicks rather than having to step through everything. Okay, so utility mode. We're down here, and in utility mode we can adjust basically everything that is not related to the creation of a current sequence or pattern. So we can do things like we can adjust our slide time, we can slip our sequences backwards or forwards in time, we can adjust our sequence length, we can adjust our sequence direction, we can transpose up or down either by semitones or by octaves. We can alter the functionality of this input, and we can save our setup, which is going to save everything in our utility mode and is also going to save all of our probabilities and excludes. So to get started, I am going to apply a simple clock. I'm going to switch back to our random mode, and I am going to go ahead and hit the randomize all button so that I can create a simple pattern for us to work with. Okay, I'm going to go back to utility mode. And the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to adjust my slide time. So I think you can hear there's a slide on step 14, I think. So here you can see we have this indicator, and if I move this to the left, it's going to decrease our slide time. If I move it to the right, you can hear our slide time gets longer. Okay, so I'm just going to adjust this somewhere back here towards the middle where, we can hear it, but it's not overwhelming. Okay, so that is our slides. We can also adjust slip, which is where we're going to move the sequence forward or backward in time. So let's say that we've generated a sequence that we really like, but it feels like it's slightly off time, or it feels like the downbeat is in the wrong place. So let's go ahead and say that step 4 right there feels like it should be our step 1. We're going to go ahead and hit slip, and you'll see there will be a bright LED here that is always going to indicate what was step 1 when we entered slip mode. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to enter slip. And now we've just moved over 4 steps. So now you can see what used to be step 4 is now our step 1. I'm just going to go ahead and move that back. And now we've taken step 1 and put it back in step 4. Okay, sequence length is pretty self-explanatory. The bright LED simply indicates the last step of the sequence. So that's an 8-step sequence. Adjust it down to 4. It's pretty boring because we've got a couple steps without gates. So sequence length, I'm going to go ahead and adjust that back up here to 16. And we're going to go in here, and now we're going to look at the sequence direction. So we've been seeing everything in forward mode. Adjust to number 2 here, which is backward. So you can now see our sequence is running backwards. And one of the cool things about this is that as we adjust our sequence modes, I'm going to go here to pendulum, the way that our gates and our ties interact is going to be slightly different whether it's forward or backward, because a tie means that whatever happens on the step following that tie is not going to sound. So if it's a note, it's not going to go to that note. If it's a gate and it's off, that's not going to happen. If it's an accent, it's not going to sound. So because of that, moving forward and moving backwards, depending upon where you have ties, is actually going to create a different sequence. So here we've got, this is just straight pendulum mode. It just gets to step 1 or gets to step 16 and bounces off. We also have what you would call a ping pong mode, where we get to the end here and it repeats step 1 and it repeats step 16. And that way your sequence is going to be a so it's going to stay on time with whatever else you have going on. Move over here to number 5, which is just going to be purely random. So within your sequence length, we're just going to choose a random step and go to that. And number 6 here is going to be a drunken walk mode, where from at any point here we have a 50-50 chance of moving forward or backwards in the sequence. So it's random, yet somehow a little bit less random than the other random mode. So now back to step 1, or back to 1, which is just indicates forward. Okay, so now we're going to go to our scale setting. So I have this currently set to a minor scale. I can move it to chromatic, and now you can hear we've got a bunch of notes that are a little bit weird sounding. And move it over here to major. And let's move it back to minor. So I'm not going to go through all of the other 13 scales that we have going on here. You can look them up in the manual, but we have chromatic, major, minor, and a bunch of other stuff going on. So transpose, we can move up. Obviously, we're down. And we can move up by octaves. And down by octaves. And in case you have forgotten where you started from, we can simply hold Shift and hit this X transpose. And that puts us right back to where we started from. Okay, reset random functionality. What that does is that this input here, when it receives a trigger or a pulse, can do one of 3 things. It can either be used to reset our sequence back to step 1. So if you're using this in conjunction with other sequencers, you can use their reset output to lock the 2 together. It can randomize, so whenever it receives a trigger or a pulse here, it will basically do the same thing as pushing this randomize all button, except that it will do it instantly when it receives the trigger. So it will go ahead and randomize your sequence completely. Or it can go ahead and do both of those together. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick example of that. I'm going to plug this into a clock that I have off screen. So let's see what mode we're in. Okay, so I'm going to set this back to 1. So now this should be in reset mode. So I'm going to plug this in here. And now you should see, yes, every 8 steps we reset back to 1. I'm going to change this to randomize. And now you'll see that every time it receives a trigger there, we're getting a completely new pattern generated. And I can go ahead and set this to number 3 here, which is going to do both of those at the same time. So it's going to automatically reset it back to step 1, and every time it resets, it is also going to re-randomize your sequence. And the last thing that we have here is the save setup. And what this is going to do is it allows you to save all of the functionality that we talked about here in our utility mode. And it is also going to save your excludes for these individual submodes and your probabilities for the individual submodes. What it does not do is it does not save the currently playing sequence. This was designed as a sort of generative sequence, so you can go ahead and create patterns easily. The idea behind it was not to create a bunch of sequences and save them and reload them. So it's going to save all of the parts needed to create the type of pattern that you want, like the probabilities and the excludes and everything down here in your utility mode, but it's not going to actually save the sequence itself. So that is pretty much all of the functionality in this utility mode. I think I've got one more video where I'm going to talk about the CV input, the random CV output, and the reset output, and that should give you a pretty good overview. Thanks for watching.